The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay. Welcome to the Eric Dollard live interview today. This is a production of A&P Electronic Media. My name is Peter Lindemannn, and I'll be the interviewer and host today for today's telecast. The first thing we'd like to do, because there's sometimes a lot of problems with these systems, this is the first time we're using GoToMeeting. If you can see the image and if you can hear my voice clearly without echoes or anything else, if you would just put a little note in the chat and let us know if you're having any problems. First of all, we will be talking about Eric's recent conference lecture at the Linddemenn Science and Technology Conference approximately 1 month ago. And so we'll be talking a little bit about that and that lecture's relationship to a new book that Eric has developed, which is the complete communication on that subject matter. So we'll be talking a little bit about those things, and we'll be taking questions on the content of the lecture as well. We'd also like to address some of the other recent allegations and controversies that have been swarming around in the last month, and just let you know where you can find the information on all of these things. And if you have any questions or if you have any doubts about what the reality of that situation is, or you can put a question in the chat, and you can have Eric answer your question directly so that your mind can be put at ease as to what the real situation is. The final presentation was Eric speaking for almost 3 hours on the topic of 4-quadrant representation of electricity. And this goes back to Tesla's original conception of how electricity operated in these systems. And he and I were having a little conversation a while ago, and I brought up the quote by Tesla from 1893, where he said that he believed that it would be the greatest day in human history when we actually understood what electricity is. And certainly he was on the quest for that discovery, and a lot of other people were. And can you just make a few comments about that situation and where we are with using electricity today? Obviously, electricity isn't electrons moving down wires.
Well, nobody really cares what electricity is anymore or wants to study it. So corporations and the industry got what they wanted out of it, so now it's kind of just all abandoned. So what I'm trying to do is to pick up the pieces and get interest in electrical science going again. Of course, Tesla's the center of all this, but you can't just say that Tesla came up with this and that. In Tesla's day, it was a whole movement that was started by Michael Faraday many decades before Tesla even got started on this. And in Tesla's day, it was you had J.J. Thomson
exactly.
and you know, and other lesser-known people that were all writing papers on this and doing experiments, and gave us basically all the science and technology we have today. But its origins are all forgotten, and its way of presentation and development has all been debased and perverted. So my aim is to bring everything back to the original point again. Electricity has specific geometric patterns and things that can be very easily understood. So my lecture was to try to get that idea across to people that don't really know a lot about electricity by explaining it in analogs and archetypes and things like that, and getting very heavy into the history of where all this came from.
Right, so the lecture is really an excellent place for almost anybody with any interest in the topic to start. It's pretty much what will be covered in the book, but there's a lot less of the math and a lot less of the technical details of that. So Eric has produced a tremendous kind of overview for the general audience on the nature of electricity and its deep roots in the natural world, and how all of the people who were really involved at the beginning of this, these people didn't think of themselves as scientists as much as just discoverers of natural principles and natural philosophers and these types of things back in the 1800s. The idea of being a scientist was not really an interesting idea. And studying how nature behaved and even understanding the underlying philosophy of nature, which is where you get the idea of being a natural philosopher, that was like the pinnacle of knowledge. If you really understood not only what nature did, but how nature did it and why nature did it, then you really understood the philosophy of nature. And this is where all of these astonishing people like Tesla and J.J. Thomson and Charles Steinmetz and others, they really kind of teased the truth out of these hidden corners of behavior, because electricity as we use it today is not actually found in nature, other than it's inherently available, but it never shows up quite this way. That's pretty much right, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's Tesla kind of considered it unnatural form.
An unnatural form.
Yeah, unnatural form, but this is what we got.
Mm-hmm. So
that's not to say that there aren't other possibilities or things to be discovered in electricity.
Right.
So that's why Tesla came up with that remark, is when that understanding was achieved, then it would be a great thing for mankind. But then, would it be? Has it been so far? Great. That can be questioned.
Yeah, so far it's been used as in a very superficial way to power up convenience, and you know, as long as people pay the power bill and enjoy the convenience, then the power company really isn't interested in us knowing anything more about it.
Yeah, and also the engineering is getting real sloppy and dangerous, because the original knowledge and understandings and workmanship are all disappearing. So it's just like we were discussing earlier about the interference and all that, is the system's becoming basically out of control.
And
no one really understands how to put these things together anymore, or how to configure the transformers, or the safety requirements is all gone. You start analyzing waveforms and signals like I do, and see what's going on inside the Earth, you find out that there's this large body of electricity that's becoming more and more out of control inside the Earth from all these aberrant power systems that are going into construction and installation. And it's a danger to the public.
So let's go back to the roots of all this. You were saying in your lecture that Tesla's vision of the real way of producing and transmitting electricity down wires was a 4-pole system, not a 3-phase system.
He originally started off 4-phase, but then a special transformer bank was developed to go from this 4-phase system to 3-phase for long-distance transmission, because it utilized less metal.
Just less wires? It's just 3 wires instead of 4 wires?
Even you know, normally less wires means bigger wires, but it was found that 3-phase uses the least amount of metal of all polyphase systems, and there really isn't an adequate explanation for that. But somehow the geometry works out that 3-phase is the way to go about it. But the natural form of electricity is 4-phase.
4-phase.
Yeah.
And this goes back to the lecture being called the 4-quadrant theory, or the four sections of
everything that manifests in electricity is related to 4 poles.
4 poles.
We're taught in school that it's 2 poles, and electricity is the flow of electrons in wires, and all those things are not really correct, and then they build up such a powerful mind virus that you can't get out of that.
Right.
Once you start going into more advanced studies of electricity, you have all these, it's kind of like believing in Santa Claus. You know, you're taught about Santa Claus, and then one day your parents tell you that they lied to you, and there is no Santa Claus. And that's the most important lesson that you learn in your life, is there's not only Santa Claus, but there's other things, like electrons.
Right. So yeah. So the idea is that what this lecture is about is to help you understand the roots in the natural world of where electricity comes from, what it is, and how it can behave, and a lot of the other things that have been discovered about it by Tesla and Steinmetz and some of the earlier researchers, which Eric has studied and is probably the greatest living proponent of, and probably knows more about these things than anybody else alive, certainly than anyone else I've met. And so if we're going to bring back or even salvage the electrical system for what any kind of benefit it can have for society, we're going to have to know these things, and there are going to have to be people who understand these things. And
yeah, I should point out that actually, you know, the four-quadrant theory is a highly mathematical subject. It's pure mathematics. In fact, somebody, I was reading a comment on the internet thing that I write on that says, you know, what I'm talking about is he referred to it as postgraduate mathematics work. So how am I going to explain this to a public that doesn't understand any of this stuff? And we really don't know anything about electricity at all. So what I'm doing in this lecture and the book is just to kind of lay the geometry and the groundwork for the whole thing, so you can get an idea of the overall shape of electrical situations and the interactions. But again, it's a PhD level mathematical topic, so it's going to have that abstract nature that some people just aren't going to get.
And one of the things that you talked about was how the four waves create what you call this big mechanical shaft of rotation down the wires.
Yeah, it operates actually like a drive shaft, except there's no apparent physical movement.
Exactly, and so this is one of the concepts that I had never imagined, that electricity, the way Tesla conceived it, actually had and functioned as this large spiraling magnetic field that was going down, and that the rotation was actually inherent in the electricity itself.
Exactly.
Yeah, and see, we're all taught that alternating current is just this fluctuation of electricity, and the direct current is just this direct movement of electricity, and no one's talking about this gigantic rotational phenomena in electricity. And
yeah, that's my point, is alternating current's been misrepresented as a reversal pulsation, and actually it's a shadow of a rotation.
That's just one. If you look at just one part of it, it looks like an oscillation.
Yeah, it looks like an oscillation, but that's just taking a shadow of the whole thing.
Right.
You know, it's like the illusion, that the sun rotates around the Earth.
Right. That's a perspective issue.
It's a projection. It's not what's actually going on.
Right.
So what Tesla did was initiate a magnetic vortex at the sending end, and then that connected through a polyphase transmission system where the magnetism actually spirals as it propagates the velocity of light down the power line, and then when that goes into the magnetic receiving device, the vortex removes the motor. And if you hold on to the motor or do something, that wave chokes all the way back to the generator, and the whole thing actually works like a rotational coupling.